Today, we're diving deep into an absolute bombshell of a filing from the International Criminal Court, the ICC, the world's court for the most serious crimes imaginable. This thing is sending massive shockwaves through the Philippines because it's alleging a common plan, a conspiracy really, to commit mass murder, orchestrated by some of the most powerful people in the country. So let's just get straight to it. This is not some wild speculation. This is the core accusation coming directly from the ICC's prosecutor, that the incredibly brutal Philippine drug war wasn't just a series of random, isolated police actions. Nope. The allegation is that it was a coordinated criminal enterprise from the very top. And right at the center of this alleged enterprise, according to what a future filing on February 13th, 2026 could look like, are these three men. You've got former President Rodrigo Duterte, and then two current sitting senators, Ronald's Bato Dela Rosa and Christopher Bong Go. So let's walk through exactly what the ICC is claiming based on the framework of their investigation. All right, so let's take a look at the formal accusation itself because the language here, the gravity of it, it's really something else. This all comes out of a document called the Document Containing Charges. Now, in the scenario we're exploring, this is filed almost a year after a hypothetical arrest of former President Duterte. And what this document would do is lay out the prosecution's entire case, their whole theory, that the thousands upon thousands of killings were the direct result of a premeditated plan cooked up at the highest levels of power. The prosecution's entire argument, really, it all hangs on this one single legal idea. The common plan. So what is a common plan? Well, to put it simply, the ICC is saying these killings were no accident, not at all. They believe they were the result of a shared criminal goal among a group of people who all agreed to carry out this campaign of murder. The prosecution is basically saying this wasn't just a tough-on-crime policy, it was a conspiracy. And the legal tool they're using to make this argument is a concept called indirect co-perpetration, and this is absolutely crucial. What it means is you don't have to be the one pulling the trigger to be found guilty of murder. If you control an organization, say a police force or an entire government, and you use that power to get other people to commit crimes, you can be held just as responsible as the person who did the act. And this is who the prosecution sees as the key members of that structure. It's kind of like looking at a corporate board for a criminal enterprise. Right at the top, you have Duterte, the CEO, who allegedly authorized and funded the whole thing. Then you have Dela Rosa as the COO, the chief enforcer on the ground. Go is the key lieutenant handling approvals. And so importantly, you have guys like Vitaliano Aguirre, who allegedly provided the legal cover to make sure the whole operation could run without consequences. But here's the thing. The prosecution is claiming this national campaign didn't just appear out of thin air. They argue it had a prototype, a sort of trial run, the Davao blueprint. And that prototype, they allege, was the Davao Model, which they say was developed when Duterte was the mayor of Davao City. The ICC describes this really clear chain of command for what became known as the Davao Death Squad. You had hitmen at the bottom, supervised by local police, who then reported up through a layer that included Dela Rosa and Go, all of it allegedly culminating with Mayor Duterte himself, whose explicit approval was supposedly required for these killings. So, how do they know all this? Well, a lot of their evidence comes from insiders. This quote here gives you the view from the street level. It's from Edgar Matabato, a self-confessed hitman. And he testified that this wasn't just about drugs, it was about getting rid of anyone the mayor saw as an enemy, and, he claims, it was all paid for with public money. And that testimony is backed up by someone with a command-level view, Arturo Lascañas, a retired senior police officer. He directly points the finger at figures like Bong Go, not as a uniformed commander, but as the logistical coordinator, the guy who allegedly made sure the nuts and bolts of the killing operations ran smoothly. So what happens when Duterte wins the presidency in 2016? Well, the ICC argues that this local blueprint wasn't thrown away. It was scaled up. They took it national. This slide really just lays it all out. The plan went from this localized death squad in one city to an operation that involved the entire Philippine National Police. The informal commands were made official through police operations like O-Plan Double Barrel. And to make sure it all went according to plan, trusted officials from Davao, the so-called Davao Boys, were put into key national posts. Now, this national campaign is covered by two more counts of crimes against humanity. Count 2 is focused on the targeted hits, against so-called high-value targets.
And then count 3 covers the mass killings in poor communities during these clearance operations, where just thousands of low-level users and dealers ended up dead.
A key part of this whole plan, you can't have a plan like this without it, was ensuring impunity, making sure nobody would ever be held accountable. The ICC alleges that the Department of Justice was basically weaponized to give legal cover to the police, while at the same time going after critics and whistleblowers. The prosecution says this was absolutely essential for the killing campaign to keep going without any fear of legal consequences at home. Which brings us right back to the present day, where this massive international legal process is colliding head-on with the messy world of Philippine politics. So what does this mean for the people named? Well, the pressure is immense. Take Senator Dela Rosa, the former top cop. He's been gone from the Senate for months. He's defiant in public, but there are reports he's also thinking about going into hiding. His main legal defense is this idea of institutional courtesy, basically arguing that the Senate should protect its own members from being arrested. Now, the case against Senator Go is really interesting because it's not about a formal title. Instead, the ICC says he had huge de facto authority just by being Duterte's right-hand man. He was the gatekeeper, the guy you had to go through for approvals, and what's wild is that despite these incredibly serious charges, he's still extremely popular. He topped the 2025 Senate race, and he maintains this whole thing is just politics. So, where does all this go from here? This timeline gives you a sense of what could happen next. In this scenario, Duterte gets arrested. Then the other co-perpetrators are named. The next huge step would be the confirmation of charges hearing. And if the judges agree there's enough evidence against Duterte, then boom, arrest warrants for the other individuals could follow almost immediately. And all of this leaves the Philippines at a truly historic crossroads, staring down this massive question: national sovereignty or international justice? Is the government going to cooperate with the ICC and hand over 2 of its own sitting senators? Or will it choose to protect them, claiming sovereignty above all else? The answer to that question is not just going to define the legacy of the drug war, it's going to define the Philippines' place in the world for years to come.